So sorry to break up all of the wonderful conversations. I like the social bunch that we have here this evening. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you to all of our Zoom attendees who are joining us online. My name is Ashley Carroll. I'm the Assistant Director of Communications in the Office of Admissions at Fuqua. I am a stand-in, actually, for my colleague David Stever, who unfortunately wasn't able to be here today, but I believe you all were probably bombarded with some emails from me throughout earlier this week. So very excited to meet you all in person. Thank you again for being here. I hope you guys saw the wonderful spread of refreshments that we have set out for you guys. Lots of sweet treats. We've got some soft pretzels, which I will definitely be sampling later on. We have some tea, lemonade, so please help yourself. There is a lot available for you all. Restrooms are down the hall. We have Wi-Fi passwords. If you guys need that as well, please feel free to ask me. I am joined here by Professor David Ridley. He is going to be our main speaker this evening, as well as some wonderful alumni who are going to share their experience that they had while at Fuqua. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it on over to David Ridley. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ashley. Welcome, everyone. I'm David Ridley. You should please call me David. I teach healthcare courses in several of our programs. I'm looking at my colleagues to see how I'm doing on my voice. Good? Okay. So I teach in several of our healthcare programs. I teach the daytime program, the weekend program, the global program, and the MSQM Health Analytics program. My claim to fame is that one of our papers became law, and I'd be delighted to bore you with that information at some point if you're interested. So I'm joined today by Dr. Jill McCabe, who's a graduate of our weekend program. I'll ask Jill to come up in just a moment. And Patrick Cox, who's a graduate of our daytime MBA program. Patrick will also come up here in just a moment. You've already met Ashley. And also thanks to Eric and Ryan back here from Multimedia, who came up from Durham to help manage this and make sure that people out in the world can see this. We're going to talk to you about some healthcare trends. I want to try to be provocative slash obnoxious, and so you should feel free to disagree. I want to at least say a few things you haven't heard before, maybe, or at least something a little bit contrarian. So do feel free to disagree. Patrick and Jill know that's just part of the classroom. We have some great discussions, and the expectation is that you'll disagree with one another occasionally in a very nice way. It's Team Fuqua, we're nice people, but do feel free to disagree. So 3 healthcare trends I want to throw out there. Number 1, we're becoming more French. Number 2, we're making more and more fixed payments. And number 3, we're getting excited about flashy outsiders, and we shouldn't. Okay, so first of all, we're becoming more French. And I say this because I get to show a beautiful picture. I could just as easily say we're becoming more like other rich countries. I could just say we're becoming more Japanese, for example. What I mean by becoming more French is that more and more people are being insured. Co-payments are falling. That's kind of a contrarian thing. You've read that in the news, right? Co-payments are falling. No, you've read the opposite. The news is always telling us just the opposite. I'm going to make the claim that maybe co-payments are falling, at least in some contexts, and restrictions are rising. So the good news is that insurance is expanding, co-pays are falling. The bad news is restrictions are rising. Okay, more specifically, insurance is expanding. It's just little by little. Many of us would like it to expand faster. Many of us would like it to expand faster in North Carolina, for example. But little by little, health insurance is expanding in the United States. And this is Medicaid expansion. There's only 12 states left, including my own, that have not yet expanded Medicaid. But there's a lot of southern states, there's a lot of Republican states that have expanded Medicaid, and we expect this to continue. Although you in here might have different views, and I welcome those. Co-payments are falling. Again, I tried to submit this to a medical journal, and they weren't interested because who wants to hear that news? I mean, if you can get your co-payments are rising article published, but you can't get your co-payments are falling article published. So I'll just share it with you because no one else will publish it. So this is just using national health expenditure data, and this is really mostly retail drugs. If you think about provider-administered drugs, then we might have a different story. But what the federal government calls in its national health expenditure data, the prescription drugs, which is mostly retail drugs, we see that the spending out of pocket in the United States has been pretty flat at about $50 billion for 20 years. So for 20 years, we've been spending the same amount of money for retail drugs out of pocket. And this is not accounting for inflation. This is not accounting for population growth. If you account for population growth and inflation, we're spending less on average. You can see third-party payment, the blue, what insurers are paying, what Medicare is paying, what Medicaid is paying is rising, but what we're paying out of pocket has been flat at $50 billion for 20 years. Okay, that's all pretty good news. And this is all pretty French. Like more people being insured, people paying less out of pocket, that's all pretty French. Unfortunately, this is also pretty French. And that is restrictions are rising. So it used to be in the United States that we had tiered co-payments where you paid $30 for the preferred brand and $60 for the non-preferred brand. Now you just can't get the non-preferred brand. Now it's not covered. And so now your pharmacy benefit manager says you can have this drug but not that drug. Now the good news is they're in the same therapeutic class. Maybe it doesn't matter that much, but you do have to change. Last year you were using this drug. It's not available for you anymore on formulary. Next year you have to use a different drug. So here we see the count of drugs that are left off of formularies for the three major pharmacy benefit managers. And maybe for those of you with good insurance like those of us at Duke, we have Express Scripts as our PBM, but you might have Caremark or Optum. You see a massive increase in formulary exclusions. So in the past, PBMs kind of said yes to everything but put a high copay on things. Now they say no to a lot of things. Okay, so that's kind of French too, that we've got more and more insurance, lower and lower copays, and yet some things we don't get access to. I think it's okay because there's a drug in class that's covered, but not necessarily the drug you want or the drug you took last year, so that could be problematic. Questions, comments about any of this?
What does PBM stand for?
Yeah, good question. PBM, Pharmacy Benefit Managers. So this is my drug insurer. So they manage my drug benefit. Duke gives me a choice among various health insurance plans, but all of us Duke employees get the same pharmacy benefit manager. In my case, it's Express Scripts. And they manage my formulary. They say these drugs are covered at these copays. PBMs have been around a long time. Historically, they were just processing claims. They were just a useful intermediary between the insurer and the pharmacy. And then we realized they've got market power. If Express Scripts, for example, has 25% of the market, when they say to Pfizer, give me a rebate, Pfizer gives them a rebate or else they get left off formulary. If you've got 25% of the commercial insurance market, you got power. And so they are incredibly powerful, even more so than the big insurers, Aetna, Cigna. These insurers have maybe 9-10% of the market. These three have 25% of the market each. They have incredible market power. And they're able to threaten pharma companies, give me a rebate, which we hope is passed on to patients and payers, or you get left off formulary. Yeah, please do keep, yeah. Great question, Jeff, thank you. Please do keep asking questions. Yeah, so many acronyms in healthcare. Please do ask questions. And of course, more detail in our classes if you all come. So, Jeff? Okay. Okay, more and more fixed payments independent of volume. I'll go through this pretty quickly. There's a lot could be said about this. We say these things in our classes. So more capitated models, more payment per head. And that's the accountable care organization model where you're not paid more for doing more, you're paid a fixed amount per person per year. I won't go into too much detail. Afterward, we can go into more detail about these. So all three of these are payments that are independent of volume. So you might do more surgery on that patient, you might prescribe more drugs for them, you might have more meetings with them, you get the same fixed amount, regardless of volume. Subscription models for antibiotics I'm going to throw in. The UK just said we're going to pay a fixed amount for a subscription to antibiotics. So we're going to give a drug company a certain amount of money regardless of how much antibiotic is used. That's potentially a good thing because we want antibiotic makers to make money, but we also don't want people to use antibiotics because we don't want drug resistance. So this is a model where the UK is paying for a subscription to a drug. Other examples of drug subscriptions, the state of Louisiana bought a subscription to a hepatitis C drug, and then all their patients on Medicaid and the prisons could use the hepatitis C drug. So they're paying a fixed amount regardless of volume. And the final, again, another plug for my own stuff, the priority review voucher is a prize for developing a drug worth about $100 million, regardless of how many units of the drug are used. Okay. Third health, any questions, comments about those? Yes, please.
What are you seeing in terms of shift to value-based care? And that might have been captured in the capitated, but...
Yeah, it's a great question. We should mention that, especially since we're here at the Margolis Center, because the folks down the hall are obsessed with value-based care. So value-based care is very important at this place. So this is a Duke Margolis Health Policy Center, really mostly over there. So a lot I like and a little bit I don't like. So I really am a big fan of the accountable care organizations. And although they're not really saving us much money yet, I really like the model. One thing I almost put in my overrated healthcare trends was value-based payments for drugs. So I really like paying based on the value of a drug. I really like that. Ex ante, but this is a little technical, this is why I left it out, but I'll say it briefly anyway. I like paying, so I like it when we say this drug adds 2 months of life and we're going to pay based on that. I like that value-based model, which is what the British do. I like that model. What I don't like is we're going to wait and see what your outcome is, and then your payment's going to be based on that outcome. My colleagues down the hall like that. I think that's kind of silly. And the reason I think it's kind of silly is if you've got a population of 100, you know on average how many are going to benefit from it, and just pay based on average what you expect rather than the realized outcome. Because the problem with paying based on the realized outcome is you need the data for it, you got to follow up, maybe the patient went somewhere else. It's just a big hassle. So if you're an insurer with a big population, you should pay based on the value you expect, because that's easy, not based on the value you realize, because that's messy. Okay. Great question. Yeah, and boy, there's a lot to be said about value-based payment. And we spend some time on accountable care organizations. Rob Saunders, who's down the hall here, is an expert on accountable care organizations and teaches one of our classes. It's a great question. Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, so I think we get too excited about, my third trend is I think we get too excited about flashy outsiders. So the first group are outsiders who think the people in healthcare are idiots. And the second group is people with magical technologies that get us all excited. It turns out they're not magic. So the first group, have you heard of these at all? Yeah. Haven got a lot of attention early on because some big names, Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, said we're going to fix healthcare because the idiots and those idiots in healthcare. But the problem is they didn't know what they were going to do. They just knew the healthcare people were idiots. Then they hired McKinsey and a celebrity spokesmodel, Atul Gawande, and then there was no there. Now, I should be careful because I like the fact that rich people are coming in and trying to fix problems because some of them may be right and have some great ideas and get some things done. And we might learn from their mistakes. But I think we give way too much attention to, what did Warren Buffett say? Healthcare is a parasite on the economy. I don't remember what he said, but he knew that healthcare was broken and a genius like him needed to come in and fix it. Come on. So not a big fan of that. You may have heard of Turing, Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro, Wall Street guy, going to fix healthcare. Valiant, consultant, going to fix healthcare. Mark Cuban, NBA owner, going to fix healthcare. Mark Cuban is getting a ton of publicity for basically what's an online pharmacy that sells cheap drugs. But I mean, there's already Walmart and Costco, and I'm not sure why Mark Cuban's better than Walmart and Costco, but getting a lot of attention. And then a couple of magical technologies. On this last one, I think with IBM Watson, we got excited by the magic of big data. I may offend some of you that are in the big data space. I'm going to talk trash on that for just a moment real fast. So we are getting better and better at analyzing and storing data. 20 years ago, I bought some data from a PBM, and it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they could only sell me 25 months of data because they were only keeping 25 months of data. So they would delete data that were 26 months old. And they were selling it for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's really valuable data, but we couldn't store it, or at least couldn't store it cheaply. Now we can store enormous amounts of data cheaply and analyze enormous amounts of data, which is awesome. So there's a promising future here. But I think there's a lot of people that think that it's magic. They hear artificial intelligence, they think magic. And it's observational data. It's not from randomized clinical trials. So Congress keeps telling the FDA, hey, use real-world evidence. Use big data collected from insurance records. But the FDA says, come on, it's observational. There's bias involved here. So we know this person who took the drug had a good outcome, but do people who are going to have good outcomes take the drug? This is like healthy, responsible people who take this drug and have all these advantages, and they have good outcomes, not because they took the drug, because they're healthy, responsible people. We haven't randomized here. So we've still got this problem with bias. Now, I'm an economist, and a lot of what we do is try to find natural experiments, try to find some sort of pseudo-randomization we can do, take real-world evidence and do something like randomization. So there are ways to do this. They're just really imperfect, and we got a ways to go. And then the other thing is there are all these technologies that are finding out, you know, these cool technologies, this app that can tell me that I should eat better and exercise more. I mean, that's great, but now you got to get me to eat better and exercise more, and that's not trivial. I think, and maybe these things can be good coaches for us and motivate us to behave better, maybe. But just identifying people who need to eat better and exercise is actually the easy part. Okay, but so I think, you know, I think we are here, and our expectations on big data are here, and our actuals are here, but we are going to get there. I mean, if you like big data and machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's going to be awesome. It's just not awesome yet. So when somebody's selling you a magical technology today, you know, just a few years ago, all these hospitals got so excited about IBM Watson, how it was going to fix healthcare. Total bust. And it may someday, we're just not there yet. It's just very early days. Just people need to realize it's not magic. Okay, that was very negative. My caution is don't be impressed by arrogant outsiders, celebrity spokesmodels, or magic. Do learn the regulation, the reimbursement, and even the culture of healthcare. I think there's a lot of those arrogant outsiders that don't understand the culture. Martin Shkreli, from Turing, the pharma bro, said those idiots in pharma are underpricing their drugs. And he was kind of right. But that's part of the culture of healthcare and pharma. It's crazy to say that y'all underprice your drugs, but you kind of do. So you can't get away with crazy, stupid 1,000% price increases. So the culture of healthcare is sort of a nuance here. And I think you can learn all these things. How can you learn all these things? By coming to our program. So the health sector management program at Fuqua. So people getting an HSM certificate, like Patrick and Jill. I assume you both got the certificates. I sure hope you did. Okay, good. So like Patrick and Jill, about 20% of our students get the HSM certificate. A lot of them, Jill's a doc, so she was definitely healthcare before. Were you healthcare before, Patrick? I think you were.
Yeah.
Oh, a little bit. You were. Okay.
Electronic health records.
Okay. Oh, electronic health records. Okay. Okay. That's a great point. You're from a part of healthcare, and you got broader exposure to healthcare. Yeah. A lot of international students, and it's across. So electronic health records and hospitals and pharma and lots of areas of healthcare. Why should you do it? Deeper knowledge, broader knowledge. We've got this network it's been around forever. I plotted back to 1964 with these data, but we've been at Duke since 1930 in some form. So when Duke Hospital was born in 1930, it set up a management hospital leadership program, and that evolved into what we are today in health sector management. So these in here were MHA degrees, and it moved over to the business school in the 90s and became MBA degrees. But it's an evolution of the same program. And then more recently in the light blue, you can see that we expanded from the daytime MBA to the executive MBA. And these are our graduates from a couple of years ago. I think it's 2019 because 2020. because 2020 was rough. And actually, and we've since then, we're going outside. We're not doing the stairs anymore, which is a shame because I love this picture. We're doing it outside of the JB Duke these days. Okay, so if Patrick and Jill would come up, I want to ask them a few questions. And first of all, would you all introduce yourselves? And should we sit up? You guys want to? Let's sit back here, yeah. So Jill, who are you?
Who am I?
Who are you, Jill?
I'm Jill McCabe, and I am a pediatric emergency physician, and I also am a healthcare administrator within the Inova Health System. And I was a Duke undergrad, graduated from Duke in 1990, and then I also went to Duke for med school, graduated in 1994. And then we'll get to the other questions. So now I have my third Duke degree, my MBA. Went back to school 26 years later. A few things changed in between. But then I came and joined Fuqua, and I guess I started in 19 and finished in 20 because the WAMBA program was a 19-month program when I started it.
Yes. Thank you, Jill. Patrick, who are you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Cox. I grew up in the Northern Virginia area, and prior to Fuqua, worked at Deloitte, where I was doing electronic health record development and implementations. Really loved healthcare, and so that's one of the reasons I chose to go to Fuqua. And then after Fuqua, I'm back at Deloitte and now doing pharma M&A work. So, maybe the HSM program helped me make that pivot. It wasn't really my choice, but I now feel more knowledgeable that I can speak to my clients who are in the pharma industry.
Good. Why did you do an MBA?
Sure, yeah. So my story is probably a little less interesting than yours, Jill, but I took the very typical undergrad, worked at a consulting firm, then got to the point in my career where I felt that I needed to get an MBA to, build out a lot more of those skills that would allow me to be more of a leader on my project teams and succeed on projects. And so, yeah, that was the main thing for why I wanted to get an MBA. I actually delayed a year from where most of my career cohort went. And when a lot of the people in my STAR class started going off to business school, I was talking to them and just hearing about some of the classes they were getting to take. And, like what David just gave you here was a 15-minute example of a lecture that you would get if you took whatever the intro to HSM class is now called. And that just really got me excited. And so that's when I decided it's time to actually apply and go back and get my MBA. And I found that a lot of the skills that I did learn in business school have been useful after returning, not just the healthcare knowledge that I got from HSM, but also a lot of the soft skills that you learn in business school as well.
Thank you, Patrick. Jill?
Mine was a bit of a midlife crisis, I'd say, but I had a long history of practice in medicine, which I love taking care of patients to this day. I find a lot of value in that and is the heart of who I am. But I also had more and more leadership positions over the course of my career. And then right before I decided to do an MBA, I was on a search committee for the new CEO of the Inova Health System. And I was just one of 3 docs that was on that committee. And so I got to meet all of the candidates coming through and see what their experiences were and what they were inspired by and the ability to really transform an organization. And they pretty much all had an MBA. So it made me think, I admired what they were doing and I could see myself doing that. And so that sort of planted the seed. And then my family went through some turmoil in 2018 and everything kind of changed for our personal life. And we really, the way we had everything laid out for our plan was totally turned upside down. And it occurred to me that, maybe this would be an opportunity for me to further my education, that would open more doors for us, give me an opportunity to provide in a different way for my family for the last 15 years of my working life. And so instead of getting a sports car, which might have been my husband's preference, I got into the WEMBA program and got an MBA. And it was a wonderful experience for me in so many different ways. I gained a ton from it.
Good. And my next question up here is why Duke? And it's funny to ask since you're a double Dukey at this point. And why did you choose to be a triple Dukey?
I think it was just easy, a little bit of the path of least resistance. I was at Duke for actually visiting there with my son, who's now a Duke student, and I was starting to think about it, and I'm going to stop by over at Fuqua and see if I could talk to them in the admissions office and find out what their, and I had looked into it a little, what their weekend MBA was all about. The bigger, so other than my allegiance to Duke, and I have found throughout my life that the family at Duke has continued to be an important part of my life. I met my husband there, but also people that I met through med school, undergrad, faculty members have continued to be really influential in our lives. And so I really saw value there. And then as a doctor, I work in the ER, and so I do a fair amount of weekend work. And so to get a weekend after hours MBA, many of the programs are 2 weekends a month. And to have to give up 2 weekends a month to school and then 1 or 2 weekends a month to work, you end up with really not a lot of leisure time. And the Duke program being 1 3-day weekend a month and then another 6-hour weekend in between really worked much better for my schedule. So not only was it convenient nearby, a great program, I had already looked into the HSM as well, and that was really, as I'm probably going on too long, as a doctor, you can go do a doctor MBA program. So there are some healthcare programs just for healthcare providers that are healthcare MBAs. And I know many people who've done them. I think they're easier for doctors because they're really geared towards doctors. But I really wanted to have a traditional MBA program and really get the full breadth of the education, even if it was more challenging. And Duke offered that, the schedule work. I love Duke, so it was an easy sell for me. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you did this version of the MBA. I think it's really special to have providers and product makers and payers and patients together in a room having a conversation about healthcare. I think that's really special.
And we had a fair number of healthcare people from
You
healthcare
did.
background within
Yeah.
our class, but we still were a minority. So there
Yeah.
were many different people to learn from. And learning from
Yeah.
people in other industries was one thing I really enjoyed about the program.
Good, good. And you mentioned that for the executive MBA, for the weekend MBA, you only need to come to campus once a month, and that's proven very popular, I think.
And fun.
Okay, good,
Lots of
good. Patrick, why Duke?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying I don't like this question because it says, why Duke? I went to UVA undergrad, and so I tell people I went to Fuqua. And,
Good.
I am not a Duke basketball fan. If anything, going to Duke made me more of a Duke basketball hater. And I searched, and I don't think they sell it anymore, but there used to be a Fuqua-specific item of clothing, and I made sure to buy that my first year, but every time I've gone back, it's no longer there. But I'll start by saying, like, Fuqua was always like probably my top choice, even when I was like still an undergrad, just thinking about what programs I wanted to go. And I can't tell you why in undergrad I wanted to go to Fuqua, but after starting to search for schools, Fuqua always came up because of the HSM program, and I knew I wanted to do something in healthcare. And so there are only so many schools that have like in the classroom experiences related to healthcare. And while, of the HSM class, I probably was sort of more in the middle 50% for people with healthcare experience because I did do healthcare work before. I felt like I knew a very small niche, and I really wanted to get that out. I wanted to round out my knowledge, and the HSM program was something exactly I was looking for. I also don't like cold weather, so I wanted to look for a school that was warm. Durham obviously offers warm, great weather. And then just when I visited, both while I was applying and then even after applying at admitted students weekends, I really just loved the people that I was getting to meet, both who were in the class above me and who were going to be my future classmates. And it just always felt like the right decision was to go to Fuqua. And I'm very happy I made that decision.
And what would you do differently, if anything, Patrick?
So it's probably very hard to hear this as prospective students as well, but like I would have spent a little less time on my classroom activities and more time
Okay, can we cut that?
more time on some of the like extracurricular activities. This is better advice for like maybe once you're admitted and you're no longer freaking out about getting into business school, but you're on teams for so many of your classes, so you can count on your classmates. It's better to go to a company presentation or to go to one of the various social events so you can make lifelong friends. And not that I didn't do that, but I wish I had maybe moved a little bit more of my time to the extracurricular activities, if I had to.
We're going to cut that. So that's fine. Jill?
I think I would say the same. I mean, ours got cut short because of COVID, so I think that to spend more time with my classmates out of the classroom, and you're not. I mean, you're not always geeking out, but you're often talking about things that are related to the industry that you're in or your career, and so having those conversations I found really rewarding. I approached business school as something, when you're 50 and you already have a career, you're not so worried about grades. You kind of know that things are going to turn out okay for you in the end. You have a good backup plan in place. And so I definitely approached business school just to be there for the learning and not for the grades. I didn't really care that much about the grades, honestly. And and what I found too very quickly was the grades part was going to be okay. If you were there and you were engaged, you were going to do just fine. So I would say what I saw other people kind of wish they had focused a little more on was just to be there for the learning and the enjoyment of it all, and then the grades turn out just fine. So I think that might be one thing to consider doing differently.
It is nice that grades don't matter. I mean,
they really don't. You would say that start your class. I'd be like, yeah, they don't. I know that too. You and I we're in our 50s, and there's other. You've lived through life, and they don't. Yeah, so it's nice.
Yeah. Can you talk about some things you gained from your experience?
So from the overall experience of doing an MBA at Fuqua, I really gained a lot of knowledge in all kinds of aspects of business that I had never had any formal training in. And some of them were, I'm not going to, deceive you, they were challenging, but all kinds of areas that I feel like I'd have much more of an understanding of: finance, accounting, and even actually I'd had a fair amount of leadership education, but I found that the leadership education that I received at Fuqua has been very helpful to me, especially as a healthcare leader in the past few years. We've had all kinds of challenges we hadn't really anticipated, and I have really fallen back on those skills. So I really gained a lot there in terms of leadership. Some of my favorite teachers were like managerial accounting, which is something I never would have enjoyed, but had a wonderful teacher who taught it.
Who was the
Elia.
professor? Elliot, good,
Elia, yeah.
good.
And he was our...
He's a sweet guy.
And he was our class, award-winning teacher and everything.
Yeah.
He taught it in a way that was just unbelievable, and you really, for someone who was had no accounting background, it just made so much sense, and so I really enjoyed that. And then from the HSM perspective, having grown up in one healthcare organization or another as a healthcare provider, you have a very limited view of things. And when I started the program, I wasn't even sure I would do the HSM certificate because I thought I already kind of know the healthcare piece, I want to learn the business piece. But then once I went to Fuqua and I realized I took, I think maybe one or two of the intro classes to HSM, you were able to see the academic perspective on healthcare and a broad range of healthcare, right? It's not just hospitals and caring for patients, but it's, pharma and regulatory things and all different types of, the economics of healthcare, all different aspects of healthcare in an academic environment where there was a lot less bias than you would expect in an organization where the culture really has driven that bias and you learn that way, whether it be in an academic organization or in a place like Inova, which is a wonderful place, but people get stuck in that view. And so to have the broadened view from the HSM and to learn from professors that taught, generally without bias and opened my eyes to a lot of different ways of doing things. So that's what I found was really valuable from the HSM program.
It's just a real minor comment on the accounting courses. The accounting this is really annoying. The accounting faculty regularly win the teaching awards, which bugs the hell out of me. I think for two reasons. Number one, they really care about teaching and they really work together. Like the sort of people we have in our accounting group genuinely care about teaching and work together and share materials to have awesome classes. So I think part of it is we just have a special group of people. The other thing is that I think is unfair. I think they benefit from low expectations.
Definitely.
But do know if you're thinking about an MBA and kind of maybe worried about the accounting course, we have really good. They really care about teaching, and they do a great job. Patrick, what did you gain?
Yeah, I'll second, like, the network was probably the most valuable thing that I've gained. And because of COVID and the situation we were in, my start date was pushed from, I was supposed to start summer of 2020. Deloitte freaked out, thought the world was coming to an end, clients were going to lose all their money and not buy professional services anymore. So my start date got pushed to early 2021. And, I hadn't been working for 2.5 years, sort of freaking out about money. And I think after I enjoyed a month of being unemployed, I started to put feelers out through some people that I met through actual Fuqua, but also recruiters that I met through the recruiting process for internships. And within a week, I had 2 different offers that I was really excited about doing. And so I ended up in a problem where I was trying to figure out, A, is Deloitte going to allow me to do this? Am I going to lose my offer? And then 2, I have 2 great options. And so just my mentality on the future of my life totally changed, I think, then because of Fuqua. So that was great. But then also just the friends that I made, I know that these are all going to be very successful people. They're very driven. They're very smart. It always amazed me in the classroom, but also just when you're having a beer, just the conversations that you're able to have with these people was really useful. I would also plug managerial accounting was probably one of my favorite courses, and I had Scott Dyring, so that's now 2 professors that teach managerial accounting that get a thumbs up. So, yeah.
I agree.
And just another, so I was an econ major in undergrad, but I hadn't really touched a lot of my business knowledge in my career. And so that first core semester where you really get back, and it starts at a 101 level, and just getting to learn all of that again was, I think, really useful.
Did you take the econ class fall 1, or did you test out?
I did take it. I'm pretty sure I could have, but I was I want to go through it with my core team. And
So that's an option. If you're a major, if you're a finance major, you can test out of finance, or you can be with your peers and have a slightly easier time and be the genius in the class.
That was also part of my thought process.
That's okay too, yeah. Good. What questions do you have for Jill and Patrick? And online questions too, Ashley, if you have any.
Those are coming in.
Okay.
So just one, and then, do we have any from audience first? Great, we can start with one from online. So somebody asked, to what extent do you see coinsurance offsetting lower copay trends?
Okay, question for me back to my trends. Yeah. And although you guys are welcome too. Yeah, because I made the bold claim that copays are going down, or at least are out. I said copays, but it's really all out-of-pocket spending for drugs, whether that's copays or coinsurance. So what's the difference? Copay is a flat $20. Coinsurance is 20%. My knowledge of this is probably, in terms of what's dominating copays or coinsurance, is probably limited to the Kaiser Family Foundation's annual survey of employers. And from what I've read, so they have a great survey. So every fall, there's an excellent survey of employers about what sort of health insurance benefits they're offering. And from what I can tell from there, coinsurance is not really taking over in that setting. And so it's not that coinsurance is replacing copays, just in general, out-of-pocket spending is coming down.
But premiums are going up, so. Or no?
Yeah, I mean, they are. But, fair. Yeah. Yes, Jeff?
What was the makeup of your cohort? In other words, if you're coming from an economic background, was there a doc in your cohort? I'm just and the same thing with you. With your physician background, was there an economic person in your cohort, or what was the makeup of your cohort? And how many were there?
Yeah, so that's probably a better question for the admissions on the actual numbers, but I think we actually did have a couple of actual had already graduated med school doctors at some point in my class. And then I think we had 3 or 4 MD MBAs, so it was in their 3rd year of med school was when they did their MBA, or like I guess 2nd and 3rd year. In my section though, I think it was incredibly diverse in backgrounds. I don't want to quote you numbers, but it felt like most people probably came, like the majority was some sort of traditional pre-MBA career, but then there were people who were teachers beforehand, people who were in tech.
Military?
Military was a big one.
But specifically with your group,
Yeah, so my team, we had another Deloitte consultant, so not super diverse there, but I don't know of any other teams that were like that. Someone he was from Peru and he was in banking beforehand. Someone who did product management at a small tech company, a former McKinsey consultant who did private equity beforehand, so also another very traditional. And then my 6th member, she's in banking now, and she did like very small private wealth management beforehand.
And my team was a little different than that. We had most people there was a lot more diversity, I think, in terms of backgrounds in the WEMBA program, I would guess. Like one member of my team worked for the Today Show. One member of my team was in mortgage, in the mortgage industry. One member of my team was in energy as an engineer. I'm trying to think of other examples of members of my team. One person was in IT and building data centers, and was his background. So we had really a variety of people. We had people from the clothing industry, so really a lot of diversity of background. Not very many people that came out of consulting. I can only think of a few that had a consulting background, and a few that had a finance background in the weekend MBA program. It was many more people who had different types of jobs but wanted to get an MBA on top of that. So the diversity was great. And to this day, there are things that come up that I'm able to connect with people who are from a completely different industry. I never would have known anybody in that that I met through the MBA program, which is nice.
What was something particularly memorable from HSM, whether it was a guest speaker, a particular class, or just like a lesson that has stuck with you? That might be a hard one.
So I can give one specific example and then one more general comment. So I took the Duke and DC health policy class. Actually, we both took that.
And I thought, class.
Yeah,
that one was combined, some daytime and WEMBAs and GEMBAs.
Yeah, and I thought that was, probably the least business school class that I took, because it is about health policy, and we got to go to the Hill and meet with staffers and just sort of learn more about like policy reform and what's going on that, which I think that's more of maybe your like dinner table conversations about healthcare than like economic data about co-payments. And then the second example is, and this is probably just something that David and the other professors did a really good job about, was they would tee up a topic and then the class would discuss it. And so I'd get to learn from people who were coming from Eli Lilly or coming from nonprofit healthcare, or who had no healthcare background but were really interested in healthcare and had done a lot of research. And that's where we did a lot of our learning rather than just listening to a lecture.
And that class was taught by David, and we had a little bit of a reverse classroom where we would actually have the lecture on video, not during the class time. This is kind of where he would present the material, we would do the reading, and then much of the class was discussion. And so that, and we had to answer some questions in advance, so everybody showed up prepared. And I liked that format a lot. There was a woman who was a recent Fuqua grad who was working for the Bill and Melinda French Gates Foundation, and she had a very interesting role there, and she had been a recent grad from Fuqua, so I really enjoyed hearing her speak. So you did bring in people from industry in each of those classes that would speak to us. That was another part of it. There was discussion, and then an example of someone from industry. Many of the Fuqua classes included that, whether it be in leadership, you would have leadership examples, even a little bit in accounting or finance, to try to to have the real world example of what you were learning and be able to speak to someone who'd had that experience. And alumni come in often too to speak in special sessions, and you get to learn from them and talk to them, ask them questions.
Yes.
I'm Gerard, and I'm going to apply to the full-time Fuqua next fall. So to go next fall, admission next fall. I'm thinking about that 50% stat that you shared. 50% of people started with a non-healthcare background. Yeah. And I'm really curious from all of your perspectives, if you have a sense of why people pivoted from what they were working on before to healthcare. Yeah. So I'm working in environment and sustainability now. Always been interested in healthcare and medicine. Okay. And this is kind of why I'm thinking about pivoting now.
That's a great question. Patrick, will you answer that based on your classmates?
Yeah. So I guess just to clarify, that is just for the HSM program, not the daytime class as a whole.
Right.
So like if you extrapolate, there's 20% in HSM, 50% have healthcare, so 10% of the class has a healthcare background. As for like why people pivot, I think it's the interest that they had at like the stage that you're in, where they're interested in healthcare. So they choose Fuqua because of the HSM program. They take a couple of the classes, it just builds on their current interest. And I think Fuqua is in a great position where a lot of the big healthcare companies come to Fuqua to like recruit on campus. Healthcare is not an industry like banking or consulting where every company is coming to every business school. And so you just have more of those opportunities. And so like if there were classmates of mine who definitely were like, they wanted to go work at McKinsey, for example, but they were in HSM, so they also applied to some of the pharma companies, and they might have ended up going to work at a pharma company or at Optum or United Healthcare or something like that, rather than consulting, and so that's how they make the pivot. The opportunities are there.
Can you think of a classmate of yours who came in without healthcare background and then went to a healthcare company? Does anybody come into mind?
Come back to me.
Okay, that's okay.
I enjoyed having non-healthcare people in the healthcare classes because they ask the best questions, and things that we take for granted or make assumptions on. People who aren't in healthcare point out to us, and I think that was much appreciated. Yeah.
One of our student leaders, student government leaders who just graduated, Jordan Daniel, he did not plan to go into healthcare, even coming to Fuqua, but he wanted to be in Manhattan, and so he interviewed with Pfizer. So Pfizer's headquarters is in Manhattan, and he got an internship offer with Pfizer, and so then he frantically needed to learn pharma. So he took my pharma course in the spring, and then came back the following year as a TA. So here's a person who did not have healthcare background, but we were able to get him up to speed so that. And it turns out Pfizer's a great choice. Pfizer saved the world, right, with their vaccine. So a good company, but he chose them largely for their location. But we were able to get him up to speed on healthcare.
Helpful. Thank you.
Good. Yes.
Yes, I'm really curious about the opportunities you all took to customize your experience at Fuqua, whether it's extracurriculars or adding on a course or getting that mentor.
Yeah, I guess.
And which program are you thinking about, day or executive?
I am going back
Okay.
whether it's weekend or full-time.
Okay.
So outside of the core curriculum, you get to pick all of your classes. And there are, I think they're called concentrations that are essentially a major where you take X number of classes and you get that on your diploma, I suppose. But no one I knew was like, I need the strategy concentration, so therefore I'm going to take these classes. These classes sound interesting to me. Or I spoke to an alum or someone a second year and they said, this is a must-take class. And so, it's about following your passions, and so those opportunities are there. As for a couple of the things that I specifically did was it's called the Duke University Hospital Experiential Leadership Program. And that's one of, I think, 2 or 3 experiential learning programs that are related between Fuqua and either the med school or just Duke Hospital. And it was me, another Fuqua student, and then 2 med students. And we were helping a doctor at Duke Health who had developed an app to train future met future doctors who are in school. And so that was just an experience to work with people outside of Fuqua that I really liked. So that's just the first thing that came to mind.
And then in the WEMBA program, and if it's changed, please correct me, but a lot of it's core curriculum, but you can do additional study alongside that. So like the Duke and DC course was something that I did I had the core curriculum, but then I did that as an elective, and they were run simultaneously. I also participated in a program that was like a consulting program. It has a different name, but it was a separate course.
Why am I blanking?
FCCP?
FCCP, thank you, yeah.
Fuqua Client Consulting Practice.
Yes,
Yeah.
where actually that was really fun. We had a group that worked on a project to support an organization in Uganda, a healthcare organization in Uganda, and they had asked us a particular problem, and we worked as their consulting team. And we had a Fuqua grad that was who was our mentor, who helped guide our group, and we created a project throughout the course, and that was the coursework. So we were able to kind of learn how to be a consultant through this course, and with a real life project that you had a deliverable at the end. And I really enjoyed that. And that also is another program that you can do kind of simultaneous with your core curriculum. Mm-hmm. And then when you have it's not at the fall anymore because the timing and the seasons change, but there is a super term where you take your electives and you take you have an option to take 4 electives at the end.
That has changed.
Oh, it's not 4 electives anymore?
So
No.
we're now doing 2 in the fall and 2 in the spring.
Oh, that's nice. So it's
Yeah,
more
yeah.
mixed in.
That's right. So the advantage is it's a little bit less intense than what you experience. The disadvantage is the coursework lasts a little longer. So you finished up your coursework in December.
Yes.
And now people are finishing it a few months later in the spring because we spread it out. So we made the elective term a little bit less intense.
Mm-hmm. But there's I thought a broad range of electives. Everybody was pretty happy with all the different offerings. It was easy to get the elective that you wanted. If there was a lot of interest in one, they duplicated it so that there could be another group. So in terms of the electives, it was hard to narrow it down to 4 because there were so many that were interesting. I did choose 2 of my electives were within my HSM certificate program. And then after I finished, then I just had to do my one special project to finish up the HSM program.
Yes, that's a big difference between the full-time and the weekend executive, the number of electives you get to take. They have essentially the same core, and Patrick took a lot more electives than Jill. Now, Jill still squeezed in some electives, like the Duke and DC, it was an add-on.
Yes, I have a hard time saying no. People go,
Right.
All right, I'll try it. Why not?
And the
When
Fuqua
you don't care
Client
about grades,
Consulting
it's
Practicum,
easier.
that was an add-on. So you
Yes.
did a lot in addition to your role.
I did.
and job.
I wanted to get every morsel out of the 19 months or however long I was there. And it was wonderful. It was interesting. Plenty of interesting. There's more things to do than you have time for sure.
Yes.
We have a question
Ashley?
from
Yeah,
online
please.
similar to curriculum. So somebody asked, why do we need accounting for something like that? What will that do?
Why do we need accounting? Patrick, why do we need accounting?
Well, you need accounting for your MBA because you're getting a general business degree, not just the HSM certificate. HSM, it prepares you to do business in the healthcare industry, and part of that is understanding how to look at a P&L statement or be able to read a balance sheet. I'm in pharma M&A right now, and while my day-to-day work does not require accounting, there are accounting terms that are very relevant to the work that I'm doing, which are not taught directly in the HSM curriculum. Right. It's taught outside of that.
Jill, why do you need accounting?
For so many reasons. I mean, the same, being able to look at financial documents and really understand what they mean. But for me, right after I did my MBA, I was working in pediatric ER. 80% of our patients went away. So all that revenue went away overnight. And to be able to keep people employed and figure out how to do so, managerial accounting was really helpful. I mean, it was really helpful because we had to really understand I'm also, even though I work within the Inova Health System, I'm an owner of an independent contracting group practice. And so we do manage our own finances. So it has been very helpful for me in that regard too. And I needed to figure out how could I keep all these critical resources employed when we had no volume of patients to support them. And now we made it through, and the masks are off, and all the kids are sick, and we're doing just fine. But it was a rough road. When you take all the kids out of school and they don't do sports, all of a sudden there's not many pediatric emergencies. And but
Saw a
yeah, it was
hand
very
up here.
helpful.
Yes.
Good evening, my name is Elijah, debating between part-time and full-time.
Good.
Patrick, you mentioned the importance of networking and socializing, and then Chili, you also said if you could do something different, I believe it's just having more fun. Well, just recognizing how important that is, what does it look like in the part-time or the executive program in terms of actually networking and building those relationships? And the second part to it is for both of you, I'm assuming everyone at Duke is fairly smart, fairly bright, but with the emphasis on learning and instead of grades, how did Duke stretch you to become better individuals, whether it's the diversity in the teams of people you're with, the coursework, the projects or deliverables at the end? I'm just curious to hear your take on those.
Start with the part-time networking.
Yeah, I'll do the part-time networking piece. So I was describing to a few people before, like it's almost like a reunion every time you go back for your 3-day weekend. And I remember the very first weekend, everybody was networking and talking from the very beginning. And I was a little overwhelmed by that. I was like, I think I'm just going to go to bed early and do my own thing and keep my head down. But very quickly, you get engaged with your classmates. They're just interesting people. You want to talk to them. And then it became, you would return on Thursday, and you'd have plans to get together with your classmates Thursday night, and just walking into the JB Duke, which is where we stay, yes. And everybody's there in the lounge area, and just being able to see everybody. I got a warm feeling inside. I really, really looked forward to seeing my Fuqua friends, even though it was no small task to leave my family and be away and have to do all that schoolwork. Just being with them, I got so much out of it personally, made some great friends. It is a little bit like networking on steroids when you're just there for one weekend a month for the WEMBA people. It's pretty intense. The program actually creates a lot of social activities for you. I think that might be a difference between the daytime and the WEMBA program. There'd always be one major dinner out every 3-day weekend that you were there for the entire class, where we would go together and faculty would come. There are plenty of opportunities to meet up with people. So it was, and your team would, and usually also each weekend you'd have a team dinner where you'd go out with the 6 people on your team. Learning from those people and learning how to be a member of a team for someone who's been on teams my whole career. I didn't think I had much to learn, but I realized I really did. I got a lot out of that too.
Yeah, I would second. So the JB Duke is the hotel that the part-timers stay in when they come, and you have to walk through that to get to the garage from Fuqua. And I would definitely say it seemed like anytime the Wembas were in town, it always seemed like they were doing the networking on steroids in the JB Duke bar, walking to the parking garage. But as for stretching, I would actually think, I think it's more those soft skills that I really was forced to sort of get outside my box. Whether it's on purpose or not, you do so much with your core team, especially during the core curriculum, that there are going to be conflicts. And Fuqua sets it up where you get a second year it's their job to sort of be that parent figure who helps, figure out conflict, interpersonal conflicts, and that's helpful. But just, it's a team that you don't get to roll someone off your team if the personalities aren't working. You have to figure out how to work well together. And I would say that's definitely one that made me stretch and outside of my comfort zone, dealing with some of the interpersonal conflicts, yet we still were able to figure out how to be a high performing team that got all our work done on time. And for the most part, all still stay friends with each other.
Also in the classroom, you hear people speaking, either the virtual classroom on the in-between weekends or the real classroom. There's so much engagement in the learning environment that you would be in class, and then you'd have a break where we would have these nice little refreshments in the WEMBA program. And we would then be like, oh, I want to go talk to David because he just said this thing in class that was really interesting to me, and you'd have this 20-minute break, and then you'd go talk to them. And so you really, it just built on itself from what people said in the classroom to what you did in between.
We had to pay for our coffee.
Yes.
When I took the boot camp, I'm like, where are the snacks? There are no snacks here. So
The weekend MBA program has the best snacks by far. Yeah. Another, yes, please.
I'd love to leave you with some trivia, and I came in late, but
Okay.
then I heard you saying, David, that the pharmaceutical companies are undercharging for their drugs. Do you mind
I did say that. I did say that.
elaborating
Yeah,
on that for us?
yeah. Yeah. So what Martin Shkreli saw was that there was a drug with no competition. And the reason there was no competition was as a small market. And so he raised the price 1,000%. And he made more money because he raised his price 1,000%. He ended up in jail, not because of raising his price because of SEC violations. But I think there are a lot of drug companies that are leaving money on the table, at least in the short term. And they're doing that because they understand the environment. They understand a number of things. They understand that there's really a dance between the pharma company and the government. The government's a good partner, giving patent protection, letting you charge your price. But if you're a jerk about it, then there's going to be consequences. And you need to understand in this culture there are consequences from that. So it's really been many of the outsiders who see that drug companies are leaving money on the table and raise their price. The other really famous example was the EpiPen. So Merck previously had the EpiPen, and then Mylan acquired it, and Mylan raised the price through the roof. Well, Mylan's a generic company that usually doesn't get to choose its price. Merck understood the dance because they're a branded company. Mylan didn't because they're a generic company. They don't usually get to set prices. Usually they're in this race to the bottom, and here they have some market power. So the point is, I think drug companies in the short term could raise their price and make more money in the short term, but there would be political consequences. They would have trouble hiring people. I just mentioned Jordan Daniels went to Pfizer. He doesn't want to be embarrassed by going to a company like Turing or Valiant or others that have crazy high price increases. So I think drug companies understand to attract talent, to retain talent, to avoid testifying before Congress about your high drug prices, that you don't and for just the long run, you bring the price down a little bit. Now, I know that's a lot of what I said today is super contrarian, right? I said, drug prices are too low, right? When do you hear that in the news? Nobody says that. I was trying to be provocative, but I think there's something there also. Thanks for that question.
Makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
Some context.
Good, thank you, thank you.
We have another question online
Please.
for the panelists. Can you share one big challenge that you experienced while earning your MBA at Fuqua?
Sure, I can go first. So I think time management is the biggest difficulty that you'll have. There is too much to do in 24 hours. Like, you need to sleep, you need to eat, you need to exercise, you have to go to class, you have classwork to do, you have extracurriculars to do, you need to network so you can get an internship. There's going to be some social activity, whether organized or unorganized, every single night. You want to do all of those things. I just listed basically like a week's worth of activities. So saying no, I think, is the biggest challenge. And you have to say no for your own sanity. Otherwise, you're going to be stretched too thin and you're not going to get anything out of it.
My husband does this. I think he's saying financial. Still thinking about that sports car instead. But I didn't really feel that stressed about that, honestly. Probably because I was already a professional working into my career, that I was able to afford it in a different way than I was when I was a younger student. But what I felt like was the biggest challenge, has always been the biggest challenge, is to balance my family in any aspect of my career. And there is only so much time, and so this took time away from everything, some time away from my job, but fortunately my colleagues were supportive, and definitely some time away from my family. And that's always the hardest, but you just figure out how you can optimize the time you have and appreciate each other. And then in the middle, we all got to move in together 24/7, so we had plenty of togetherness with COVID. But yeah, balancing the family and the MBA was hard, but we got through it.
trade it for the sports car.
I'm ready for the self-driving car. I don't even like to drive, so it definitely was not going to be on my list of priorities.
Yes, please, Troy.
What's your favorite thing about Duke students?
It's trite, so forgive me for saying something so trite, but Team Fuqua is real. So this is our brand, and the people just are really nice and play well together. So I can say really obnoxious, provocative things like drug prices are too low and this and that, and we can just have a great conversation about it. So I think the fact that people are so friendly and collegial, and as Jill said, as much as possible, I try to give my lectures in advance on video and then have a conversation in class. And I am slowly building up my video inventory so we can do that more and more. So I talk less and there's more and more of a conversation. And a lot of alumni tell me that that's something really special they miss, that having payers and providers and product makers and patients all in class together having an interesting conversation is really special.
Thanks.
Thank you. Jeff?
Question. With respect to the type of, the way you actually teach,
Yes.
how much is, as you say, from a video perspective, how much is lecture, how much is case by case
Yeah.
scenarios?
Yeah. So more and more, thanks in part to the MSQM Health Analytics program, I've built up an inventory of videos that keeps getting bigger. So I guess in my pharma class this past spring, I guess I would give about 30 minutes worth of videos in advance. And they're good videos where it's scripted, it's professional, and there's some animations added by a team in India to make it a little slicker. And so about 30 minutes of video, and then in class, ideally the first thing I do when I walk into class is ask some questions. Like Jill said, you've got the questions in advance, you've prepared. I don't want to say something that you could say. And so as much as possible in the class, I want to dig right into a case. And we do in a lot of our classes, I'd say most of our classes maybe, we use cases. And so here's a business case, here's this hospital trying to decide whether to stay in an accountable care organization model. Here's a drug company launching its product, say a vaccine, and how's it going to price that vaccine? And so as much as possible, and what I would typically do is video lecture up front, case for an hour, lecture from me at the end of class. Here's what we've learned. Here's some things that have changed since the case. The case is 5 years old. In those 5 years, here's what's happened to the company. Here's the punchline. So yeah, video, case discussion, and then a little lecture and an end of class.
And there's also a lot of access to the professors for additional help. So there's office hours, there's virtual office hours. If you do the WEMBA program, they were extremely accessible. If you were having trouble with a concept, there were organized like study sessions with the professors or the additional TAs. But there were also, you could even engage with the professors directly if needed. I found them to be really accessible and very helpful. I don't know if that's I'm sure similar.
Yeah.
Very accessible.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I just can't miss a good opportunity to learn, and I think
Good,
all three
sure.
of you are qualified. You mentioned, I believe you said co-pays were going down, but
Yeah.
co-insurance, no, co-pays were going down, right? And then
Well, so
Patrick-
yeah, I was probably too loose with my language. What I wanted to say was out-of-pocket spending has gone down per
Okay.
person.
Per person.
Yeah, because this is not adjusted for population growth. So this shows that out-of-pocket spending for retail drugs has decreased. Yeah, that's my claim.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to get it, because Patrick, you said premiums are going up.
Yeah.
But if you're saying out-of-pocket spending is going down,
Yeah.
does that include premiums?
Yeah.
I think all three of you might
I
have
think
thoughts
this
on-
is, so I think the national health expenditure data are supposed to include premiums, although it's hard for me to figure out exactly how they do that. But in general, the national health expenditure out-of-pocket does include premiums. Now, how well they do it, I'm not sure.
And over the
Yeah.
last 10, 15 years, I do think
Yeah.
we're trending in the right direction in terms of expenditure. That's really what I was trying
Yeah, well, I highlighted the green, but you might also look at the blue. which says we're spending more and more on drugs. And then is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that sustainable or not? I think it's sustainable in the sense that, so healthcare spending is 20% of GDP in the US, and drugs are about 20% of that. So 1/5 of 1/5 is 4%. So 4% of GDP is going toward drugs. Is that too much? I don't know. I mentioned earlier that we had a cure for hepatitis C, a miracle vaccine that saved, what, trillions of dollars? So this is, unfortunately, we're spending billions, but a vaccine probably saved trillions of dollars in terms of GDP, in terms of keeping, functioning economy. I actually think it's okay that 4% of GDP goes toward pharma, because look at the awesome products we're getting for it. I mean, and we're on the, there's been some incredible new drugs for cancer, for example. There's this recent drug it's still in clinical trials, but for anal cancer, everybody who took this drug got cured. Now, maybe it's a very select group of people with this, but I mean, that's amazing. And if we're going to spend 4% of national income on curing diseases, that's pretty awesome. So again, I'm being a little bit contrarian because everything you hear in the news is, this is unsustainable, blah, blah, blah. We've been saying it's unsustainable since the 1970s when it was like 7% of GDP. Now it's 20% of GDP, and we're still saying it's unsustainable. Maybe it's unsustainable, but I just want to be contrarian and say, maybe it's okay. But Patrick, your thoughts?
Nothing to add.
Okay.
He's the expert.
I think it just needs to be spent in the right way. Like, I do
Yeah,
think that we're
fair.
really lacking what they have in Great Britain, and he mentioned this in his intro. We don't have a good way to determine what is the value in terms of the quality of life that's added by this intervention, and does that make that cost worthy? And that's a tough conversation for Americans because we're very much used to just having everything on the table for us and not thinking about it in that way. But I do think that the spending is too high without that kind of thought process. I think we have to think that way. And there's I feel as though the spending in healthcare is unsustainable, and I'm part of the problem being an ER doctor. I mean, the way that we care for people is not the right way to promote health. And that's another thing I liked about the HSM program is people from all these different perspectives, we could all agree upon that. There's got to be a better way to take care of these human lives. So it was nice.
Yes. Yeah, and fair point. It's not if it's not cost effective, it's a waste of money.
Right.
So we are definitely wasting some money on things that are not cost effective. Caitlin?
Yeah, so COVID has changed a lot in healthcare, thinking telehealth, shifting where care takes place, health equity has really surfaced. So how would you say the curriculum or courses have shifted to adapt the changes that are just happening like before our eyes now?
Yeah. So many changes because of COVID, but there's so many changes every year in healthcare. So a magical thing about being in healthcare is there's always something changing. And that's very appealing for me as someone who studies healthcare because there's always something new to study. And I think that's very appealing for you as people who might go work in healthcare because if you can figure it out, you can make a huge difference. But one way we adapt to new things happening is that we bring in outside speakers who are engaged in those things. And we have a couple of our courses are specially tuned into this, like our HSM seminar. You guys have a different format for those, but that's one format in which we bring in speakers and bring in new things. In terms of my pharma class, what did we do differently? When we talked about vaccines, we had a heck of a lot to talk about. And we talked about, one thing we talked about was the difference between the US and Europe, that the US, through Operation Warp Speed, dedicated 10 times as much as Europe, set aside 10 times as much money. So US and Europe, similar populations, GDP somewhat similar. We set aside 10 times as much. We did a lot of cool things on the supply side. Unfortunately, didn't do as well as on the demand side. But thinking about my own class, certainly when we talked about vaccines, we had a lot to talk about with COVID. You're right, telehealth has been fascinating. We talked about why telehealth might continue or not. I mean, one reason why it took off was because of COVID, but also reimbursement was at parity. So if Dr. McCabe is going to get the same amount from a telehealth visit as from an in-person visit, what happens when that goes away? Yeah, will she be as willing to have a telehealth visit at lower reimbursement for roughly the same amount of time? So we definitely talked about telehealth and those issues as well. Actually, what do you think about that, Jill? About
telehealth?
Yeah, and reimbursement.
Yeah.
And also regulation about practicing across state lines.
Oh, yeah. The regulation piece across state lines, I think, has to go away. I think it's just creating too many barriers and making it too difficult for people to get access to care. And even just on the medical side of just being of licensing is probably too down in the weeds, but a lot of that is really tough. And I think that we are facing a shortage of providers in this country that's only going to grow, and we're going to need to be able to help people achieve access, and so that's going to have to melt away. And it did with COVID to some degree, so I think there's a lot of motivation legislatively to move in that direction. In terms of the reimbursement, I'm kind of, maybe it's my doctor hat, but I'm like, well, there was a lot of work we were doing we weren't getting paid for. Now all of a sudden we could do telehealth, and we're getting paid for this work that wasn't being valued in the past. And so it's definitely, there's two sides to it. But I think in terms of access to care for people who are working, they don't have to take a half a day off work. They can access care. They can access care for their child. They can do the follow-up visits. If we can make it work in a way that it's accessible for all, I think it would solve a lot of problems.
It's also a really interesting question for insurers too. Do you want to pay at parity? So do you want to make it easier for someone to see Dr. Jill? Maybe not. If the concern is the child has something that's going to go away by tomorrow, you probably won't take her in for an appointment, but maybe you do a telehealth visit, but maybe it's really low value. And so as an insurer, I think you want to think carefully. We've seen this also with retail clinics, that retail clinics really increase use of healthcare and doesn't necessarily add a lot of value. It makes it easy for you to get the care you don't need. Now, having said that, it's super cheap. So it costs insurers just an extra $1 per person per month. So the expense is negligible. But there's an interesting question for insurers about how easy do you want it to be for someone to see Dr. Jill or a nurse practitioner in a retail clinic, because it will lead to little increases in spending, and for a lot of those patients, it probably won't make a difference. I'm sure Jill can think of examples where it really did make a difference, but there are a lot of cases where a lot of these things resolve on their own.
And you can understand why it'd be helpful for employers, right? Because they would want to offer that to their employees to have that access to keep them.
That's a great point.
Maybe so there's other ways that it's creating value.
100%. If it's making your employees happy and making them more productive and show up for work and the like, then heck yeah. And that's a lot of what we do, I think, as employers. We provide health insurance benefits that make our employees happy. Good question, Caitlin. Ashley.
On the subject of change, we did get a question online asking, do you see the social determinants of health becoming more of a focus in healthcare?
Yeah.
And if so, how do you see that playing out in the future?
Yeah. Jill and Patrick?
I mean, that's definitely one of the hot topics in healthcare across the board. So that's basically where my knowledge stops. So I don't want to speculate anymore, but I would assume that leads to more focus in the curriculum because that will be what your customers are asking for.
Yeah, a lot of our young people are interested, a lot of young people. A lot of our students, not young people, equa-age people, a lot of our students are very interested in it. And we've had several students go recently to City Block, for example, and to organizations that have been partnering with the state of North Carolina. So Mandy Cohen is our Secretary of Health and Human Services, or recently stepped down as Secretary of Health and Human Services, and has been working with a lot of Duke people, including our MBA students. Dr. Cohen, she's the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and she tries to combine those. And so we have seen opportunities for interaction, especially with the state government. And I think there are especially opportunities in this space. And as our data, and we're getting better and better data. I just disparaged data in one of my slides. But one of the it's been really cool at the state of North Carolina. They've been able to combine school data and prison data and health data. So the state of North Carolina has all these data in the same data set. That might make you a little nervous. It makes me very happy that they're able to track patients throughout, and children. So children, for example, who are interacting with the legal system and having school issues and health. It's really some powerful stuff, and a lot of our people are interested in these. Having said all this, it's super hard. So we're getting better data. I said earlier, we can figure out that I need to lose weight and exercise more, but that's still really hard.
But through the program, you get exposure to people like that come in and speak to you and talk to you about what's happening in North Carolina. We saw a lot of that as part of the HSM program. I mean, there's no question social determinants of health are very important in health outcomes. And I think there's been a long history of, like the Kaiser Foundation having studies that have proven that, but it's become more front and center. And even as a healthcare provider, within our EMR and Epic, we see social determinants of health information on every patient that we see that they draw out of different databases, so that you can start to consider things like food insecurity when you're caring for a patient that is something that we never learned about or thought about 20 years ago, but could have a huge impact on their outcome. So
we have some MD, MBA students very interested in food security. They've started a new organization.
Do you know the name of that one?
I don't, but Gerard, I can figure it out, and I can.
We can take this one offline, but we're in person, so we can take it.
Yeah. But I would be delighted, and I think what I'll do afterward is I'll just email one of my colleagues who will remember, because I'm blanking. But I can picture the student, but I can't picture his name offhand.
Okay, sounds good.
Yes.
We talked a lot about the Fuqua program, but the HSM has a boot camp, which is really unique to the program. What did you guys like the most about the boot camp?
Yeah, what is boot camp and what did you like?
So boot camp was for the full-time program. The first week before school starts, all the HSM students come together, and I believe the purpose was basically just to give you a healthcare 101, so that someone who was coming in with healthcare experience would be on the same playing field as someone who came in who had no healthcare experience from the start. And so, you learn about, you understand what PBM means. You learn about what an ACO is. You get a little introduction to providers, some to payers, some to pharma, a little health tech, I believe, as well. And so that was the in-classroom portion. There was, I believe, every night a company presentation of sorts.
That's right.
Which starts to get you in that recruiting mindset, allows you to also just learn about what are some of the things that various different large companies are doing in the space. But it was also just a great time to start to form that HSM cohort, which I think was great because you just have this similar group of people who are all interested in healthcare, and you get to meet them the first week of school before everyone else. And did you have HSM boot camp?
So, and it may have changed too, I think, but I participated in the same HSM boot camp. I think there were maybe only about 10 of us that were Wemba Gemba that were there in person with about 200 other students. But we took the same classes and we did it. There's a project that you work on throughout the week. So you are put on a team. It's like right away you're on a team, you're working with other people, you come up with a project and present it at the end of the week. But it does fill in the gaps of pieces of healthcare that there might be many that are not familiar to you, or there may just be some like medical devices, things that I had not really thought a lot about, that I was able to learn about during the boot camp week.
Executive MBA students can do it in person or on virtual. Yeah. Which would you recommend?
I kind of did the blended one because I got called back to work, and so I didn't make it to the project and I had to write the paper. But I would say, because if you do the virtual one, you have to write a paper at the end versus doing the group project. I would say do the in-person, because I think being there in person, first of all, just to be able to learn in person is nice and better, and something that's a luxury at this point. But that part was good, but also getting to be put on the teams and get to know people and meet the people from industry, because they would come talk and then there would be a cocktail party after where you get to speak to them, and that was interesting.
Yes, great. So as Patrick said, it is Healthcare 101 to get people up to speed. people coming from outside healthcare or people who really know one part of healthcare. But also for the full-time, daytime MBA students, it's the first week of the MBA. And it's kind of magical because you're meeting people in your MBA program. And it's just a really exciting time to meet other folks and hopefully encounter a few executive MBAs, although there's only, say, 10 executive MBAs for more than, say, 100 daytime MBA students. But for the daytime MBA students, it's kind of magical, I think. But for all of them, there's also the networking because Johnson & Johnson or Eli Lilly or Medtronic or Deloitte or somebody will come and give a talk and provide dinner. Yeah. And bring a bunch of the alumni back with them. So they'll usually have a speaker who brings 10 other alumni back to mingle.
Yeah, it was really nice on the first day of actual school that I already knew some people. So, yeah.
We have one. Oh, you go for it.
Good.
I was just gonna say, what's your favorite thing to do in Durham? Or what should we be excited about Durham if we've never been?
Okay. Okay.
Go to a Duke basketball game. Like, there's still nothing better than that.
It's still pretty magical to go to a basketball game in Canada.
Yeah.
We won't tell anyone you said.
There's a great farmer's market on the weekend in downtown Durham. Eat. Yeah, there's some great restaurants downtown in Durham. There's a great food scene.
So when I arrived at Duke in the 90s, the food scene was awful. And when you were students, it was awful. But then in the 2000s, it exploded. It's amazing. And I finally got to enjoy, I was not a foodie before, but then once I started eating good food, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't go back now. And downtown went from really sleepy to really vibrant. It's really fun to go downtown for dinner or a ball game or a show, but the restaurant scene is fabulous, I think.
And very easy, very accessible. I mean,
Yeah.
you can literally walk from the East Campus of Duke to downtown and do things, so it's nice.
Yeah. What would you add to that, Ashley?
Yeah, the restaurant scene is great. If anybody likes sushi, Sushi is top of the list in the Triangle. And then you have to go to a Bulls game. That's
Okay. It's a baseball team, the minor league
Yeah.
baseball team. Yeah. They're the division. They're the AAA team for the Tampa Bay Rays. Thank you, Jeff, for the Rays. Yeah. Plus, they've got the history. Nobody knows Bull Durham anymore, but they've got the history from that movie. Yeah. And then let's go to Caitlin, and then should we wrap? Caitlin? You just asked the great thing. Then Ashley.
Yes, we have one
Okay,
more
sorry,
question.
that way.
This could be a great one to end on. So towards the beginning, you'd mentioned there were 3 areas to focus on to better understand healthcare, which was regulations, reimbursement, and culture.
Right.
Can you give any recommendations of what people can read or listen to or watch in order to have those better understandings?
Yeah. Well, come do HSM first and foremost. How do you guys stay current? And how do you get up to speed? So one challenge is that I think there aren't great, for example, textbooks because it's always changing. And so in the pharma space, I follow Stat Plus to get a feed. I subscribe to this, but you can do free ones like Fierce Pharma, for example. I also used to do Kaiser Health News. I do Morning Consults. I do Politico. So I get some email blasts telling me the latest. The FDA also sends me emails. I'm on their list. So I'm on several lists where I get information blasted to me. But there's not for me, you guys might have very different views. There's not an obvious book, for example, because things are always changing, and because I disagree with several of the books. But also they get out of date quickly. So they're not, the healthcare books are not going to have COVID in them. And so things change fast. But what do you do to get informed and stay up?
Yeah, I probably should do a better job, but I just pulled this up. So I subscribe to Relentless Healthcare Value, which is a podcast. They do weekly episodes. I listen to Politico's Pulse Check,
Yeah.
I think they do 1 or 2 just very short podcasts a week. And then there's a podcast called The Business of Healthcare, and they do a podcast every week. It's out of a HSM type school somewhere in Texas, and so they cover all different aspects of healthcare. But I should probably read more.
I do. I listen to a lot of podcasts too. I walk dog and listen to the podcasts. But there's one, Creating a New Healthcare, that I really like. There's all different types of new ideas in healthcare that I enjoy. I am on like distribution lists that I have daily emails, and that's how I stay up with the healthcare administration. And I listen to the Daily because I do think it's important to listen to like the healthcare media and to hear what people are hearing about healthcare and how it's being perceived. I mean, the Daily is a little bit more scientific because it comes out of the New York Times. Not scientific, but it's based in some type of reporting. But I do try to make an effort to hear what my patients and parents are listening to understand that.
And I have a series of healthcare leaders videos on YouTube, so Google me and find those too. If you can go check those out. Okay, so that's probably a good time to wrap. So what a pleasure. So thanks very much for sticking with us for more than an hour and a half. So it's really nice of you to stick through this. And so thanks for being with us, and I hope you'll join us at Fuqua. And thanks to these. Yeah. And thanks to Jan Patrick. That was fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.